Two, one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Brittany Sharp McCollum from Blossoming Bellies Birth. Hi, would you like to tell us
Hi.
what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I own a business called Blossoming Bellies in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a certified childbirth educator and a certified birth doula. So that means I provide informational, physical, emotional support to people through pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum. I teach childbirth preparation classes, and then I also attend births in a support role, non-clinical support role, in hospitals, birth centers, and at home. And then I also do training workshops on pelvic dynamics for birth professionals. So for midwives and OBs and nurses and doulas and childbirth educators and prenatal chiropractors, massage therapists, and so on. And I do those workshops local in Philadelphia and then also around the country. And I speak at conferences on pelvic dynamics as well.
Awesome. So you want to tell us a little bit about pelvic dynamics and what exactly that is?
Yeah, sure. So pelvic dynamics basically just refers to the way that the bones of the pelvis move, so I have a pelvis here. I like to always have pelvises nearby to demonstrate, but there's a lot more mobility in the pelvis than we usually think about. And pelvic mobility is a really big part of the labor process. And when we understand how the bones of the pelvis move apart in different areas of the pelvis, then we are able to better facilitate a more efficient labor process and also provide better comfort for the person in labor. So dynamics is basically just the movement of the bones of the pelvis. But then I like to incorporate it into biomechanics, which is the way that the bones, specifically in this case of the pelvis, move in relation to the forces around them. So that would be the force of the contractions and the force of the pressure from the presenting part of the baby, and also the forces from the positions that people get into, the way the gravity plays on the bones of the pelvis and the way the baby's positioned, and the way that femur rotation and sacral nutation play into that. I totally am an anatomy junkie. I love that. And I'm really thankful to have found a way to incorporate my love for anatomy and discussing anatomy and my love for movement into birth work, which is also something that I love. We would think in general that clinical providers have a lot of information about pelvic dynamics because, I mean, obviously, if a baby is moving through this space, it makes a lot of sense to fully understand how that space can shift. But in reality, the information that I use to kind of facilitate these workshops on pelvic dynamics is really based mostly on kinesiology and physical therapy resources, as opposed to obstetrical resources. The pelvis really is kind of the movement of the bones of the pelvis seems to be a mystery for a lot of birth workers. So I'm really happy and excited and honored to be able to shed some light on that and hopefully make people's birthing experiences more positive.
Absolutely. So what are your thoughts on like the normal like hospital birth position? Like,
Mm.
yeah. See, I've had
Yeah.
two hospital births and I had one home
Okay.
birth.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
yeah, two totally different experiences, and I absolutely did not like the position that the hospitals
Yeah.
usually make you sit in.
Yeah. So we like to, in the birth world, we like to refer to that position as the stranded beetle position. And it's the position that we typically see people give birth in the movies, where they're reclined and their legs are pulled as far apart, side to side as possible, usually pulled apart by someone else, not even themselves, and then usually hiked up towards the ears as much as possible, too. It's an incredibly vulnerable position for somebody that's going through something as intense as labor. So there's that emotional component of that position, which is very common in hospital settings, but also can be common in birth center and sometimes even home birth settings as well, depending on the provider. But yeah, that position is very vulnerable. So from an emotional standpoint, it isn't always most ideal, especially if someone is not chosen on their own to be in that position. From a physical standpoint, when we let me bring out the pelvis again. This sacrum here has lots of mobility. And so when we lie on our backs, then we compress that mobility of the sacrum. The sacrum doesn't have that opportunity to move out of the way of the baby's head. So even as the baby's head's pushing down, ideally, if someone is upright or on their side, the baby's head pushes the sacrum out of the way. And so we don't have that ability when someone is lying on their back. In addition to that, thigh rotation is huge. When somebody pulls their legs all the way out to the side, it creates external thigh rotation. So think of it like if you were seated on a chair and you spread your legs apart and you turned your feet outward, that creates external thigh rotation. And when the thighs externally rotate, it actually puts pressure on the hips here, and we get less space at the bottom of the pelvis. So not only do we have decreased mobility from the sacrum in that position, but we also have decreased space side to side in that position. And we have that emotional vulnerability in that position. And on top of all that, we have an increased likelihood of perineal tearing. And the perineum is the area between the vaginal opening and the anal sphincter. And when we spread the legs side to side like that, that skin is pulled side to side and does not have enough flexibility front to back as it would in a different position. And so we wind up in a situation where we increase tearing too. So that's my research-based answer to how I feel about that position. It is someone's legal right to give birth in whatever position they choose. If they want to be in that position, by all means, go for it. But also knowing that you have the option of being in whatever position you can get yourself into in labor is really important. Thankfully, in our maybe not quite our current birth climate in Philly because of everything that's going on with COVID-19, but generally in Philly, I have noticed over the past year or so that a lot of providers are much more open to people being in different positions in a hospital setting than they were a few years ago. So I think things are moving in the general direction of more awareness of the importance of giving people options and letting people know what their options are. But of course, we're not fully there yet.
Absolutely. I've talked to a few different women in birth. I've actually had a midwife, and I've
Cool.
had another birth educator on my show. And so you'll be the third one in birth.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And so it's just so important that we get it out there because it hasn't been talked about for so long. And we are starting to shift and move into like a new birthing dynamic. And I think it's awesome and important. Like I said, I have a 10, 11, and a 2-year-old. So
Wow.
it's a huge difference in time. And from the 14 and the 11-year-old, like those were both hospital births. And like it was very basic, you know. I waited until like the last minute to go in because I hate hospitals anyways. And they rush you in, then they rush you into the birthing room. They put your legs up in those stirrups, and you have to basically sit there and push. And with my last one, I was like, I didn't like any of that. Like, you know, through the entire thing, like my body, I could tell my body naturally wanted to do something. I didn't want to sit in that position. I wanted to move. I needed to move, and I didn't like being stuck there. And so that's when I came across, you know, we had more access to the internet by my third one. So I was like, oh my God, there's things called a midwife. Like I can do this in the comfort of my own home. Like I don't have to go to a hospital. You know, I can do this from any position. So I think it's really awesome that you and these other women and tons of women across everywhere are coming more and more out about birth and speaking more about it and getting more into it because it's amazing and it's important.
Yeah, I totally agree, obviously. Um, yeah, and I think, what's at the heart of what I do, and I think for a lot of birth workers, what is at the heart of what we do is that we really try to make sure people know what their options are, regardless of whether someone chooses to birth in a hospital or a birth center or at home, regardless of whether they choose to be on their back or their side, or they choose to get an epidural or they don't get an epidural. That doesn't matter. What matters is coming out of the experience feeling like you did something amazing rather than feeling like something was done to you. And so being in control of the decisions that are made, being actively involved in the decision making, knowing all the options that you do have, knowing what your rights are in the laboring room is really important. I think a lot of times we have this tendency to, well, first of all, we have this tendency in our culture to research everything. But then when it comes to birth, it's like we all of a sudden hand off all that authority to someone else. I feel like sometimes we spend more time researching how we're going to like redo our bathroom than how we are going to explore options for birth. And I mean, birth is such a transformative experience. And you know, some of us are lucky enough to do it a few times. And I think it's something that changes you every single time you do it. And if you come out of that feeling like you are empowered by your experience, it really translates well into having a healthy postpartum. But if you come out of it feeling traumatized, which I think far too many women do, then we're in a situation where it just feels like, how am I supposed to integrate this into the rest of my life? One of the things that I often talk with people, expectant parents in my birth classes about, is how um, people who you don't know, like maybe someone at the grocery store, is so willing to share their traumatic birth story. And usually it's like they share it with the pregnant person, which is the last person that needs to be inundated with traumatic birth experiences. But I think that our society, and it's changing for sure, but our society does not offer a safe space for people to explore what happened to them in birth. There is this idea of like, healthy parent, healthy baby, which of course that's a given. Of course we should be striving for health. And we have a lot of problems with healthy parents and healthy babies in our current society as well, with our maternal mortality rates. But shouldn't that be like the very shouldn't we be able to set the bar even higher? Shouldn't it also be like, let's have not only healthy parents and healthy babies, but let's also make sure that we make their experience as positive as possible. And I think, inevitably there's going to be some feeling sometimes of a lack of control over birth, but then giving people the space that they need to talk about that and process that afterwards is also really important. So I do think we're making changes, and I think that we are shifting the paradigm surrounding birth, and I think social media is a huge part of that, but we still also have a long ways to go.
Absolutely. But it has come so far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So how is the birth world with this whole COVID-19 thing going on?
Oh my goodness. It is changing day to day. I am, I'm pretty immersed in the birth community in Philly. I've been doing childbirth education and being part of the community for the past almost 13 years. And I feel like I'm pretty connected. We have an amazing birth community. We're so lucky to have a really kind of tight knit birth community. But as immersed in the birth community as I am, as filled as my news feeds are with birth related stuff, I still feel like it's so hard to keep up with what's going on. There are limitations on visitors. In the postpartum, completely restricted in a lot of the places that people are birthing in our area. But then even there's lots of restrictions on the type of support that people can have during labor. Some hospitals have one support person only, which is forcing people to, not work necessarily with a doula if they have a partner that's the primary support person. Other places are offering one support person and a doula. And there's, I completely understand the reasoning as to why. Obviously, it's important to limit the number of people in the birthing room. But when somebody has committed to having a doula, they're really relying on that support for, again, emotional, informational, physical guidance during the process. And to all of a sudden lose that is crazy. So the doulas, not only in Philadelphia, but around the country, are really coming together and shifting what they're offering and how they're offering and things in response to this. So there's a lot more virtual support happening, which of course is not quite the same thing. It's not at all the same thing, but at least there are other options. And, we're trying to kind of scramble and figure out how we can still provide the support that we need to our clients.
That's awesome. And it's amazing that we've got technology and stuff in this scary time. Like it's definitely, it would be a lot worse if we didn't.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. How's Philly during this whole time? Like, I mean, it's absolutely craziness. Like Vegas, I'm here in Las Vegas, and we have shut down the strip. Like that has never happened. Yeah, Las Vegas Boulevard is dark. Casinos shut down. They shut down all gaming. Like there's no gaming in any of the restaurants, bars, gas stations. Yeah, it's absolutely a little intense. Like as a local here, we're a little stressed out.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, in Philadelphia, I think it's statewide actually. Any business that is not considered essential for life is basically closed, and I think they're enforcing that starting Saturday. I might have that. It might be enforced tonight. I'm not quite sure, but yeah. But so nobody is really working, in at least in the same way. Again, like it's great to have virtual options, and thankfully, a lot of us are able to shift and do things virtually. Um, but it's a total change. And I think, especially for brick and mortar businesses that rely on people literally coming in. I mean, I'm even thinking about like the local coffee shops that are just owned by families in the community, and the type of impact that it's going to have on them. It's just really crazy. It's really unprecedented. So yeah, it's crazy. And hopefully, things shift quickly and we're able to all kind of get back on track. I think, I tend to be somebody that likes to look on the brighter side of things as much as possible. And so I think the one good thing that's coming out of this, in terms of like, from a professional business standpoint, is that it is really kind of pushing us all to build up our tech skills and to be like, okay, how can we still offer support to people, which could be the new wave of the future, is like all this intense virtual support that many of us weren't really doing before. So it's kind of opened up an opportunity for a different type of doula support, which may benefit people in a way that, we never really thought of before or didn't think of as much before.
Absolutely. I know here at home, like we're working on my website and my podcast a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're about to come out with some videos too, because this is not just a podcast that I'm working on. Like, I want to bring more back to the community with this. And we're going to be working towards supporting people who have been victims of rape.
Wow.
And I want to get together like packages for them. So when they go to the hospital, they have fresh clothes and items and stuff that they need to prepare themselves to leave the hospital. So we'll be coming out with videos and stuff like that. And I've got some t-shirts and stuff that we have for sale on our website and stuff to help with that. But
awesome.
we're working on the website, trying to keep ourselves busy, freshening up on like our art skills and stuff on. I've got the whole family. We're all working on everything. We've got, the kids are doing Adobe and working on their drawing and their art skills and video making skills and all sorts of stuff. So I'm definitely thankful for technology, and we can use it in this time and kind of keep ourselves from being bored and cabin fever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think a lot of us are doing that too here, where we're kind of looking at this as like, all right, we're stuck in our houses. What are all those things that we wanted to get done for our business, that like all that behind the scenes stuff that we don't always have time to do unless it's like midnight and we're trying to get it done. So it's kind of like, okay, like we're forced to stay inside. So how can we at least make the most of that? And then, for people that have kids, it's actually like there's a great thing that's happening of like spending more time with your kids. And I'm trying to see that too, is like, this is an opportunity to do things with them that on a daily basis I don't always get to do. We're also driving each other crazy, but that's just part of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely finding new and creative ways to kind of wear them out.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Luckily, we're in a 2-story. Like we have 2 levels to our apartment, so there's a little bit of exercise on those stairs going on.
Good. Just run the stairs a bunch of times. Right. That's funny.
Yeah. So do you have any women that inspired you to get to where you...
Yeah, so oh gosh. Yes, I think more like in my personal life, which also of course like translates into professional life, but in my personal life, my grandmother was really inspiring to me. She passed a few years ago, but she was probably the most flexible and laid back, not physically flexible, although I don't know, maybe she was physically flexible too. But she was very like go with the flow. She was really laid back. She was really very always very supportive, even if she totally didn't understand what you were trying to do. And I always try to kind of channel her a lot when I'm doing things and like getting stressed out about things. I mean, I have 3 kids. My 2 boys are 13 and 7, and then I have a 4-year-old girl. But my 13 and 7-year-old, when they were much younger, we would go to her apartment, and she was mobile, but she had a wheelchair because she had fallen at one point. Anyway, she had this wheelchair in her apartment, and like the kids would get in the wheelchair, and her apartment was not big, and they would like push each other around in the wheelchair and like knock into things. And it was like, in my mind, I was like, this is totally chaotic and crazy. And it didn't bother her at all. She was just like, they're just having fun. It's okay. And I try to channel a lot of that. So that's very inspiring to me, like her ability to just kind of go with the flow and also be really present in the moment and like recognize like, this is like, they're having a good time. Let's appreciate this moment rather than tell them to stop what they're doing. So I really appreciate that about her. And that was always really inspiring to me. And she also was someone who did not hold on to physical objects. She was very much like, she loved spending time with people, and she loved like the experience of things. But when it came to physical stuff, she was really good at letting go. And so I also try to channel that a little bit too, like try to minimize my stuff as much as possible, and just really appreciate the time and the moments together as opposed to all the physical stuff. So she's really inspiring for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, she sounds like a wonderful woman.
Yeah,
And
she was awesome.
those are some great lessons. I mean, sometimes we hold on to physical things way too much, and one day they could be gone. Like,
Yeah.
and it doesn't help to like hold on to that and to hold on to that angst. And absolutely.
Yeah. And even when it comes to like sentimental things, I try to separate like, okay, this object does not hold that memory for me. Like maybe it reminds me of that memory, but I have that memory regardless of that object. So like I try to just be like, let go as much as possible, and just, stay in the moment, stay present, and appreciate the time rather than like the things. I get it that things represent certain times, but yeah, I just try to let go. So I find her really inspiring.
Absolutely. Is there an empowering moment that you had yourself?
Let's see. I think in retrospect, my first birth experience was probably empowering. In the experience itself was not empowering, but my first birth experience is really what pushed me into doing birth work. So in the large picture, it was probably an incredibly empowering experience. I kind of went into the process, like I just went into it totally trusting my body, and assuming that my providers were on the same page as me, because why wouldn't they be? And then, and I didn't know anything at that point. I I wasn't in the birth community at all. I just figured people have been giving birth for thousands and thousands of years. So, it works pretty well most of the time. I was healthy. I was young. I had no complications in pregnancy. I had no reason to assume that anything would get complicated. So I was like, this is great. Like my baby will come when they come. And then I realized at the end of my pregnancy, like, oh, wow, they're totally not on the same page as me. I did take a really amazing birth class, but I was really late in pregnancy when I took it. And after taking that class, I was just like, oh my gosh, I should have been asking these questions all along. And at that point, we kind of felt like it was too late to make changes in our plans for birthing. And I will put that out there to anyone. It's never too late. It is never too late to make a change if you're not comfortable with where you are. So that's a great lesson in and of itself. But I came out of my birth experience really feeling like I wasn't listened to, feeling like I didn't get a whole lot of guidance or suggestions or support from the people around me. And I came out of it feeling like, what the heck went wrong with that? Like, how come things didn't go as I had expected? And it started me reading a lot more about birth, and like anything I could get my hands on about birth or anything I could watch about birth, I was fascinated by it. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the medical system, generally speaking, and there are exceptions, and there are definitely exceptions within the medical community, but the medical community does not necessarily understand the normal physiological birth process. And that was like eye-opening to me, that like the normal process of labor was not something that was well understood, and it didn't necessarily fit into the way that the system viewed childbirth. And so I felt like people need to be more aware of their options, and that's really what pushed me into childbirth education, and then pushed me into doing doula work. Is that, like, again, it's not about what choices you make, it's about knowing that you have choices and knowing how to communicate your preferences and knowing what questions to be asking. And so I think my first birth was really pivotal in changing my course. And I think if I hadn't had the experience that I did, maybe I would have come out of it feeling like, of course, birth just happens and it's fine and normal and, like, whatever. But I came out of it feeling like, wow, things should be totally different than that. And so that was probably really kind of pivotal in terms of my life. And definitely like the path that my life took professionally after my first son was born.
Absolutely. And it's amazing that you went there, like, you know, after my first two births, like both of them I kind of felt the same. Like I'm like, this is not, you know, like I didn't know really anything about it. I was horrible. I didn't take any birthing classes. I was like,
Yeah, that's
my
okay.
body knows what to do. It'll be
Right.
all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't really have any problems in labor and any of that, but I also just went along with whatever the hospital had. I was like, okay, give me the epidural. Okay, I know when to push the baby out just fine, recovered, was back in, no big problem, but I didn't like it. I wasn't in control.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
yes, and that upset me. Like I remembered, like I wanted to go to the bathroom. Like I was like, I have to go to the bathroom, and they're like, you can't get up, and I'm like, this is no, I want to get up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that didn't fly with me. So with my third one, it was actually funny because I went to I went to go try and go to the OB that delivered my second, and he wasn't. I didn't follow up on my annual stuff. Like I hate going to the doctors, but he wasn't able to do the birth. He was already so busy that he couldn't do that birth. So then I had to go and find a different doctor. Found a different doctor, and the baby like wouldn't come out. Like he was doing the Doppler and she kept hiding. So he couldn't
Mm-hmm.
find her heartbeat. And I was like, well, I know it's there because I can feel it. Like I know. And I know
Mm-hmm.
she's fine. But she wouldn't come out for him. And I was like, well, I don't really like this guy too much either. So then I went I was like, well, this is my third birth, so maybe we can go a different route. And my husband, luckily, he was like, yeah, whatever you want to do, you're the one that's handling it. So I was like, let's go. I want to look at a midwife and try a home birth. And so I went and I found my midwife, Erica, and she sat there and talked to the baby, and the baby was like, hello. And let her like listen to her heart and everything. It was so cute. Like I was like, I didn't even know babies could hide. But I was like, this is really funny. And like every visit, the baby was just ecstatic, was playing along with her, and like it was just way more comfortable, relaxed. I didn't have to just walk in, they look at you, they measure your belly, do the Doppler and then leave. Like she would ask me how everything's going, like, you know, and those options are so amazing. Like I didn't even know those options were out there before. I didn't even know anything could be different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important that we like look around and find what's comfortable for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And just like you said, it's so much about feeling in control. And a lot of the feeling of control comes from feeling listened to, which means, like you were describing, it sounds like your midwife just took the time to like sit with you and talk with you about what's going on. And feeling like somebody is listening to you is a huge plus in terms of reducing your stress level in pregnancy. Feeling like you're forming those like connective bonds, especially with
Mhm.
the person that's going to be providing your primary care in labor. I mean, labor is really, really intimate. And so when you feel like you have connected with that person, it can definitely put you at ease during pregnancy and labor.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I feel like it makes everything go so much smoother too. Like there there was pain because it was a
Mhm.
complete natural birth.
Mhm.
But I was able to do what I needed to in order to soothe that pain. And I didn't have to have an epidural. So right after birth, I was able to get up and move. I healed a lot faster. I didn't tear, which the first
Awesome.
few, they cut me. They were like, "We're gonna just
Mm.
go ahead and cut because you're gonna tear anyways."
Mm.
And the third one, like I was worried because I was like, "Well, I've been cut 2 times before." So no tearing, no issues, absolutely seamless
Wow.
without a problem.
Wow.
So, yes, it's absolutely a wonderful, interesting thing, I think, to look into. And I'm glad you're educating everybody on all the different ways and definitely the different positions because
Yeah.
that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah. And you were talking about like you were able to move and do what you needed to soothe the discomfort. And like I am not one to tell anyone that labor is pain free. I think that some people's perception of labor discomfort is that it's not pain, and that's awesome. I mean, your perception of what you're feeling is totally based on your thoughts, your feelings about it. But I also, especially like when I'm teaching classes, I don't want to set people up to feel like, oh my gosh, labor is painful, and I was told that it wasn't, and so now I feel like I have no options. So we talk about like labor being uncomfortable, but one of the things that I emphasize so much is the importance of movement. And so if someone is birthing without pain medication, then I encourage them to be in positions where they're using like rhythmical rocking, because when you move your body with rhythm, it engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which literally brings on feelings of calm and relaxation and decreases anxiety. So when someone is limited in their mobility, then we lose that opportunity to use that rhythmic movement to actually make ourselves feel calmer. The other one of the other benefits of movement is that, again, like you're changing that space in the pelvis, so you're helping to wiggle the baby down, which can make the labor process more efficient. And if we are in a situation where a baby's head is positioned in a way that might not be ideal for moving through the pelvis, the more we give the baby changes of space from that movement, the more likely it is the baby will shift their head and maybe flex their chin and then be able to move through the pelvis more easily. So movement is just so important. And then the other thing that I like to stress to people too is that even if you have an epidural in labor, you do not lose all your mobility. We have most of the information that we have about birth as a society comes from the movies. And so in the movies, like somebody's begging for the epidural and they get the epidural and they're in bed. So we have this perception of labor always happening when someone's reclined in a bed. And so sometimes I have people in class that are like, oh, I didn't even know you could get up if you don't have an epidural. Yeah, you can totally get up. Or you could do a million positions in the bed, whatever you want. But also with the epidural, people assume that, okay, once I get that, then I have no movement. And that's also not true. My general rule, my maybe guideline is better than saying rule, but my guideline is every 5 contractions, you'd find a new position, even if it's something as simple as shifting where your knees are in relation to one another. So someone can be on their side and just shift their knees, and we've shifted space in the pelvis. Or it could be something as dramatic as going from an all fours position to sitting on the toilet. But my point is that even with an epidural, there's still that ability to move. With somebody helping you and supporting you and helping to shift you, you can absolutely move and change that space. And that does a whole lot of things. First of all, that's going to create more space in the pelvis, but also that encourages more partner or support person involvement, which helps everyone to feel like they're invested in the process. And then also that movement helps the laboring person to feel like they are also in control to an extent during the labor process. And that's really important because, again, coming out of it feeling like you are to the best of your ability in control of what was happening is really helpful in having a more positive outlook on the birth process. So yeah,
Absolutely.
movement is awesome.
It is. And with my third birth, like it helped the process so much. Like I went from sitting on my back, like in the water, like relaxing, to sitting like in a toilet position. And then I went to all four. And as soon as I went to all four, birth was on. Like water
Awesome.
broke, baby came. Like, yeah, it went right away. And then not only that, but because of the all four position, I actually have a really cute picture. My husband is sitting on the ground and I'm in the pool and I've got my arms over the side and he's got my arm locked like in a like almost like in an arm wrestling hold, and
Mhm.
we're holding on to each other. We've got our head to head, and we're
Oh.
just sitting there holding each other. And that's when she came out, was right then. So
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
yeah, it
Yeah, that's
definitely,
awesome.
yeah, it was awesome. It was a wonderful experience. A lot better than, like I said, I'm not against hospital births. It's whatever you're into, but for
Mhm.
me, that was the ultimate thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And being able to capture that moment too. That's so awesome that you have that, like forever you have that visual. That's so great.
Yes,
Yeah,
doula.
it's really awesome.
I had a doula in training that was with my midwife, and she took those pictures for me because all hands out to her. But I was like, I'm good. Like I don't need really anything. Like I know what I'm doing, you know. And
Mhm.
so she was just there, and she just like she worked the camera for me basically. Like it was an amazing experience. Like I had my dog was there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we had everybody there. We had the kids there. My daughter was with me up until the point where I transitioned and started pushing. Like she was there getting me drinks and keeping me hydrated and talking to me and stuff. We had music playing. Like it was definitely an awesome, calming, wonderful experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There are some birth videos that I love to show in my classes, and
yeah.
one of the birth videos that I show is this like really just very zen birth experience. And even though and the person has no pain medication, and there's no IV or anything, she's not connected to anything, but I think it's so valuable to see that regardless of where someone's birthing, because out of every single birth experience that you look at and you're like, wow, that was really positive or that was really amazing, there are little things that you can pull from that and take into your own experience. So even if somebody is choosing to birth in a hospital, hearing about, like you were talking about, the music and having a conversation with your daughter, and the position that you were in with your husband, like hearing about that, those are things you can bring into any birth setting. So the more positive stories we hear, the more positive visuals we see of birth, the more we see all the options available, and we can be like, okay, that's something that's really great, and I'm going to take that into my birth experience regardless of whether I'm birthing at home or a birth center or hospital. So yeah, sharing positive birth stories and positive visuals is so important, and there's definitely things that we can take from all of those positive resources and put into our birth experiences regardless of where they are happening.
Absolutely. And that's one of the great things about like social media and the
Mm-hmm.
internet stuff now is this stuff is being shared, and we don't just have to rely on movies, because that's where most of my original education came from, was movies. I'm just like, oh well, this is
Mm-hmm.
gonna suck, so let's just fucking let's just bite down and just
Right.
do it. You know?
Right. And it definitely doesn't have to be like that. But when that's, I mean, movies, the whole point of like birth scenes in movies, it's to sensationalize it. It's to make people be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's to keep you on the edge of your seat. One of the things that I like to tell people is that like your average low risk birth, aside from the baby being born, is pretty uneventful. And that's a good thing. Like you want
Yeah,
birth to be uneventful. There shouldn't be screaming and yelling. Like you want it to be as calm as possible to keep those good hormones flowing and keep the process moving.
absolutely. And screaming does not help. I think it
Mm.
actually slows it down. Like,
Mm-hmm, definitely.
yeah, I was always told I was the quietest birther ever, because I'm like, it doesn't do any good. Like, I've got a high pain tolerance, but at the same time, like, I know it doesn't do any good. And I think you waste a lot of your energy coming out instead of coming out the other
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah, definitely. I like to encourage people, if they feel the need to vocalize, but to do it in that like really deep primal way.
Yeah,
Because that high pitched screaming, like if you're you're sitting in your house and you hear someone scream on the street, like immediately your adrenaline's gonna rise and you're probably gonna go to the window and be like, what's going on? But in birth, the same thing's gonna happen. If somebody's screaming, everybody gets more on edge. And it's if we're able to bring that person's sounds really low instead, then we release endorphins in the body, we relax muscles, the pelvic floor relaxes, and it leads to feelings of being more in control, because that endorphin release helps you to feel a little bit better. So shifting high pitched screaming sounds into more of like a deep, low moaning sound is really helpful. And yeah, and if, of course, if somebody doesn't want to make sound, that's also totally fine. It's just, again, like having options, knowing all of the different tools available to you, all of the different choices that you can be making, and then picking and choosing what works for you is really important.
Absolutely. So, do you have advice for a younger generation?
Advice for younger generation. Um, so yeah, I think I'm thinking about my 13-year-old right now. And if he listened to me when I gave him advice, maybe what I would say. Usually he doesn't listen when I give advice, but I mean, I think that we live in this time where obviously like having tech skills like I've developed over the past week is really important, and like we have access to more information than anyone has ever had in a faster way than anyone has ever had throughout history. And I think being able to use that in a positive way, like using that to better inform yourself, using that to do research, using that to fact check things, that's so important, because then when you are making choices, especially when you're making like big life choices, like choices about birth, I think it's so important to utilize that in a way that's positive. I mean, of course, social media can be used negatively for sure, but we also have more access to information than we ever have before. So do your research, like especially when it comes to big life experiences, invest as much time and energy into those things as you would into like, changing your Bitmoji image or something like that. And I think sometimes we don't do that. Sometimes it's easier to invest a lot of time into the small things that are trivial, and it might feel daunting to invest the time and the research into something that's more like impactful. But I think we're at a point in time where we have the resources pretty easily accessible for a lot of people to really do some research and figure out your options. So I would suggest, using that to your advantage whenever you have big life choices to make. Do as much research as possible, explore your options so that you go into it. And no matter, whether you're going to go along with a recommendation that's made to you or not, just knowing that you can have a say, have a conversation about it, again, leaves you feeling a lot more in control and positive. And that's not just about birth, but just, any sort of big life choices someone's making.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to change. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's just that simple. If that path is not working for you, use the knowledge you have and change to a different path, and,
Mm-hmm.
it'll work a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, flexibility is key. I
Yeah.
feel like, as a parent, like parenting is like the number one way that we learn to be flexible and learn that like sometimes we don't have control. But again, as long as you kind of know your options and can sort through things, like maybe you have some sort of sense of control. But yeah, flexibility is super important. And trusting your gut too. When it comes to things like childbirth, nobody knows your body. And like you had mentioned, your baby, nobody knows your body and your baby better than you. And tuning into that, taking some time every day to just like connect with your body. And, if you're pregnant, connect with your baby and just like sit with that is really important for, I don't know, I think just for like coming back to a point where we trust our instincts. A lot of times we live in a society where it's much easier to like take an aspirin when you have a headache than it is to hydrate and take a nap. But the more time we spend actually focusing on what our bodies need and like sitting with ourselves and like trying to figure that out, again, like the better we know ourselves, the more confident we'll feel in exploring the options that are best for us, and the more positive we'll ultimately feel coming out of big life choices.
Absolutely. So my very last question is, do you have an inspirational quote that you use?
Okay. So I'm so bad with things like that. When it comes to talking about birth, I can talk about birth for hours. But then when someone's like, give me a quote, I'm like, I have no idea. I've never heard any. It's just that like my mind goes blank.
Which is
Let's see.
fun. Do you have
Go ahead.
something that like you just tell yourself? Like even
Yeah.
that works too.
Okay, so there is something that I often tell myself, and I've been telling myself a lot over the past like week or so, and that is, maybe it's not a specific quote, but um, that is really just like focusing on the things that you can control. I actually, in periods where like my kids get anxious about something, I encourage them, like, okay, you can't control everything in life, but you can take a moment to sit and think, like, okay, what are the things that I can control? Those are the things that I should be focusing on. And then the things that I can't control, let's make a plan up for those things. If that does happen, how am I going to move forward from there? And I think I sound like a control freak. I've been talking about control so much this time, but yeah, I think, like, there are a lot of things that are outside of our control as just people living in the world and as parents and in childbirth and in life and in our careers, and focusing on the things that you can control and investing your energy in those things helps to bring a sense of calm. And so that would be my maybe favorite quote or thought, especially at times where I'm feeling stressed or anxious or my kids are feeling stressed or anxious. I like to try to remember that there's only so much that you can control, and those are the things that we really want to focus on.
That's amazing advice. That's an amazing quote. Like,
okay, good.
No, that's perfect. And it's so important. Like, and sometimes I never really thought about that. Mine's usually breathe, like just take a deep breath and then just tackle whatever,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But that's absolutely important, like, to stop and think and know what you can control and what you can't, because especially right now, there's a lot of things that we can't really necessarily control, but just got to take it one day at a time and control what we can.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Perfect.
Cool. Good.
You did it.
Thanks. I like your quote too, though, because I think even just something as simple as breathe, like, that's so important, because what's the number one thing that we do when we're stressed? We stop breathing. We hunch up our shoulders and we tighten up and we stop breathing. So I like that too. That's really important.
That's usually something I say, and usually something I tell people is breathe first. Let's breathe. And then I also, like, Bob Marley had one that was like, I've kept with me since I found it in high school, and wisdom listens and knowledge speaks. And that just like reminds me, like, sometimes just kind of like hold back and, wait for all the information, wait for everything, and, then speak, because you don't want to be just rambling off. And definitely take it in, and you'll come up with a better solution.
Yeah, that's great, because I think a lot of times when we are faced with something stressful, our immediate response is reactionary. Our immediate response is just like all based on like how we're feeling in that exact moment. But then if you breathe and you pause and you listen, okay, then like your tension goes down and you're able to actually like maybe speak in a way that's kinder, or speak in a way where the person you're talking with is more likely to be receptive of what you're saying. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that concludes my podcast. Thank you for being on my show.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. This was my first podcast interview ever, and I feel like, whoa, I was super nervous, but you made it so easy. Thank you.
Not a problem. I'll come back and check with you. Like, I want to come back and revisit everybody again. So we'll definitely see you again.
Cool. I'd love to come again. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.